everyone. Good afternoon for those who are connected from India. We are glad having arrived at the very last day of our summer school. And guess I have to say it has been a big success, but I mean, working activity isn't finished because we have a great host today. And I'm proud and delighted to introduce you Professor Kaun from Södertörn University, Stockholm. Anne is professor in Media and Communication Study. She is magister degree in Media and Communication Study from the University of Leipzig, as well as a degree in European Studies from the Technical University of Kaliningrad. In June 2012, she received a PhD from the University of Orbero in cooperation with Södertörn University, with a dissertation about civic experience and public connection, media and young people in Estonia. In 2010, she was associate research student at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and between 2013 and 2015, she was visiting postdoc at the Center of Global Communication Studies at Annenberg School for Communication, University of Pennsylvania. Currently, she is working in a collaborative project on narrative of Europe. Between 2013 and 2015, she has been student board member of the International Communication Association, IICA, and since 2017, she is the vice chair of the Internet Group of Activism, Communication and Social Justice at the ICA. Her research interests mainly include media activism, media practice, algorithm, automation, and artificial intelligence. I have to say that we couldn't wait to hear from you, and Anne, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm also really glad that I can be part of the Spring School. And what I'm going to present to you is an ongoing project where I'm looking into a part of artificial intelligence being introduced in welfare institutions or by welfare institutions. And I'm kind of interested in what this does on the societal level. What does it mean if we are relying increasingly on algorithms and digital systems to take decisions automatically, and like look into the broader consequences of the digital welfare state. But I'm also interested in, on the micro level, how people are relating to these changes. So on the one hand, I'm interested in the large scale cultural implications, but I'm also interested in the experiences of people living with those technologies. How do they relate to this technological change? And this is what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm considering different forms of cultural techniques, which is a term from German media theory used by different theorists. For example, Bernhard Siegert was introduced this notion, and look into forms of cultural techniques as a way of relating to algorithmic systems. But first of all, I would like to say a few words about the automation of the welfare state, the kind of background, why am I interested in this topic. What we have seen in recent years is an increased use of algorithmic automation in public services. So one example is in the UK, the universal income, but also we are talking about citizen scoring that's been used, for example, in China, or sorting algorithms that are used by, for example, different employment services, for example, in Austria, but also Sweden is experimenting with these kind of sorting algorithms. At the same time, we have seen an increased interest from the public as well, like wanting to get transparency and overview over where algorithmic automation is being introduced in the public sector and the welfare sector. So, for example, we have mapping initiatives that are trying to provide registries of algorithms that are used in the public sector. And we have also discussions of the consequences of using automated systems. For example, the UN Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty and Human Rights is discussing in a report from 2019 the implications for human rights if we are looking at the digital welfare state. I can see that there's a hand raised. Kalpesh, do you have a question?
Yeah, hello.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to know more about this citizen scoring and how is that done. I just wanted to have some clarity before we proceed ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the idea there is that there are different variables or categories where citizens are being scored, which has consequences for their participation in social life. Like, for example, I mean, in the Chinese system, I haven't researched it. I'm only pointing it out as an example where this is being used, where you kind of scored or can gather scores depending on how you behave in terms of, you know, adjustment to rules and regulations and so on. But this also has implications for, you know, how you can move in public space, what kind of modes of transportation you can use, and book trains and flight tickets and so on. But there's ongoing research in this context on the citizen scoring system in the Chinese context. I mean, it's of course quite different in the European context in other countries, for example, but there are similar ideas about categorizing citizens according to certain variables, and that you then automatically end up in different groups, so to say, with implications for your everyday life. I've also been with colleagues looking into the increased academic engagement with ADM, which is the acronym for automated decision making. And we have looked into the literature, like we have done a systematic overview, and this is just a map of the shared references within texts that are using the notion of automated decision making. And our aim was to kind of identify how the field has evolved over the past couple of years, and if there are any common grounds, what kind of disciplines are contributing to this emerging field, and if they share certain terminology or references. And what we've seen is that there's a really spike in publications in 2017, 2018, and this is very much likely related to the GDPR, which was introduced in Europe in 2016, and where we have a provision which is kind of suggesting governance and regulation for automated decision making, so that citizens have to be informed that decisions have been taken automatically, but also there's this human in the loop provision that is put into the GDPR. So if the citizens request a human decision, they have the right to do so. So we assume, in connection with the GDPR being introduced, also the academic interest in questions of automated decision making increased, and the terminology was more broadly used also in academic research. But what we have also seen is that the field is quite fragmented. So we have disciplines such as computer science and data science engaging very strongly. It's also the field with the most texts appearing, but we also have increasingly scholars from within the social sciences and humanities who are using the notion of automated decision making. But there are few shared references across these fields, and also the terminologies, the foundation, the keywords that are being used in these texts are quite diverse. So we can say it's an eclectic field that kind of lacks a common approach to how we understand automated decision making. And this is also related to the question of what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the broader process of digitalization turning analog artifacts into digital artifacts and digitizing parts of social life? Are we talking about algorithmic automation, about the decision-making processes that are being automated? Or are we talking about artificial intelligence, which is also quite broad and fuzzy terminology, but has become this kind of buzzword in all kinds of disciplines? So when I've been looking into the use of digital systems in the public sector, it becomes quite clear that we are not seeing this very advanced and complex AI applications being implemented. What we see are rather simple digital decision trees, for example, or what has been called weak AI. So there's rarely any machine learning involved in the processes that are currently being used. We see, as I said, simple decision trees, for example, in Sweden, the Trelleborg model that has automated decisions on social benefit applications. It's a static algorithm that is not self-learning or machine learning or using training data. We sometimes see these kind of sorting algorithms also not knowledge-based, but based on preset variables, and then citizens are being sorted into different categories depending on what kind of characteristics they have. But we also from time to time see experiments with predictive algorithms where training data and machine learning is being used in order to predict a certain future behavior. But often these kind of pilot projects are not being introduced on a large scale, either because there's a public outcry or public criticism, or that there are any legal issues involved with the data being used. But it's particularly interesting for the Nordic countries to look into these technologies that are very much based on large amounts of data, because the Nordic countries as welfare state countries have since the 1960s and 70s really been gathering a lot of data on their citizens, and in combination with a lot of social trust by the citizens volunteering their information, it's kind of a perfect growing ground for these technologies, drawing on registries and public information. So that's also why it's important to maybe look into especially the Nordic countries and how this whole technology develops. And there, in the Swedish context in particularly, there have been also attempts to map out the extent of how much automated decision-making has been introduced and been used in public administration. And the one national agency, the Swedish National Audit Office, has undertaken a mapping, also trying to trace historically when automated decision-making was introduced, and they have a very broad definition of ADM. They basically say any process that involves a computer is somehow automated decision-making. So they say Sweden has been working with ADM since the 1970s. That's when the public administration has been computerized. So that's also interesting to see what kind of definition they are applying. And they have identified 13 agencies. There are more than 200 in Sweden that make decisions that are relevant directly for the citizens, for private persons. And they also set a number of like 148 million decisions are being made automatically by these agencies. These absolute numbers maybe don't matter that much. It's just interesting that they are trying to really map out the extent, I think. And then they've also identified the most active agencies, which is the insurance agency. There's only one agency for insurance in Sweden. It's this public agency. Then we have the tax agency and the agency for transport that are the most active ones and at the forefront of automation. And in connection with that, I've become interested in how citizens themselves are experiencing automated decision-making and what their attitudes are towards this process of introducing algorithms in public administration. And if we think of the GDPR, for example, that has this provision of, the right to have human decisions, but also getting meaningful information about how decisions are taken, I think it's very crucial to also ask about the citizen perspective in this whole process. So what's actually how aware are people of automated decision making in the first place? And here I really advocate for a comparative approach to studying these questions of attitudes and experiences to see if there are also differences in different welfare regimes, how people relate to ADM and their attitudes towards it. So what we've been doing the last couple of months is introducing a comparative population representative survey in Estonia, Germany, and Sweden. And the rationale here is that we have 3 different welfare regimes with different ideas about how and what should be included as foundational basic welfare provision. But also we have different degrees of digitalization, with Estonia being very much at the forefront and being very quick in introducing digital technologies, especially in public administration, while Germany and Sweden are Sweden is taking some kind of middle ground here, and Germany is a bit slower in terms of digitalization, but they have very high ambitions. Like many countries have these kind of strategic documents claiming that in the next decade they are going to be the best, the quickest, the most digitized. It's like a very common trope in these official governmental strategy documents, and the 3 countries are quite similar. But the degree of automated decision-making in public administration, there we have a difference. And we in the survey have focused on questions of awareness, experiences, and attitudes towards automated decision-making. You can also see the total amount of respondents that we had for the survey. I'm not going to talk too much about the findings here. I just wanted to mention that we have both checked for individual factors like questions of gender, age, educational level, and socioeconomic background, but also mainly if the context, if it matters in what kind of welfare regime you're living in, are these the individual factors, or is this kind of structural factors that are explaining differences in attitudes towards ADM, which is the better way of explaining those differences between the 3 countries. And we have found that the individual factors that we have been measuring aren't very much explaining differences here. It is very much about the welfare regime that you're living in. And what we have seen is, in general, that, and now I'm very much condensing the findings just for a matter of time, that Germans show among the 3 countries, it's still quite high social trust in institutions, but among the 3 countries that we have been working with, Germans have the least trust. But they are showing most trust in automated decision making and perceive the least risks in terms of automated decision making. So together with Sweden, they are generally moderately enthusiastic about the future developments and like maybe introducing more automation in the public sector. And in comparison to Sweden, then Sweden has a very high social trust or trust in societal institutions, but the lowest trust in terms of automated decision making. They also perceive a higher risk in terms of future development and are only moderately enthusiastic, while Estonians take a middle position here. Both in terms of trust in social institutions, but also when it comes to trust in automated decision-making and perceived risks, but they are the most enthusiastic in terms of future development. So we are also trying to kind of explain with in relation to historical developments why this is the case. And we would say in Sweden, because it has a history of very strong trust in social institutions, we kind of think that maybe the civil servants play a crucial role in terms of building trust into those societal institutions. And we then think that the direct contact with civil servants is decreasing with automation. This might explain the lower trust in the Swedish context. While in Germany, we have a lower trust to begin with in societal institutions, and that's the same also for Estonia. So maybe the technology and this kind of often claimed embedded values of just decisions that are not based on human interpretation might reintroduce social trust in institutions if technology is used as a mediator instead of civil servants, for example. So these are some of the findings that we're currently elaborating and trying to theorize, and also draw on other theoretical engagement with technological change, trying to explain these national differences between the countries. Yeah, that's exactly what I summarized now. So we can continue. In the last part, I wanted to focus on what this talk actually is called, namely the cultural techniques of ADM, and here focusing really on practices of relating to technology, making sense of them, and dive further into this kind of micro level of trying to make sense and relating to technological systems. And here I think cultural techniques can be a helpful notion to do so, because they kind of help us understand the symbolic work, the speaking and translating and reading of cultural artifacts, or how we really relate to technologies. And in this process, we could say there are different techniques of doing so, and they incorporate or consequently highlight certain aspects of technology while they are kind of mitigating and ignoring others, and we are forgetting about other aspects of technology. So also if we think of how we use our own devices, we have knowledge to a certain degree on a mundane level in order to be able to use those technologies, while a lot of the background processes that are ongoing, we know very little about. And in a similar way, we can also try to make sense of how we relate to automated decision-making. That's my proposition. And in order to illustrate this argument with the cultural techniques and kind of provide a typology of cultural techniques of relating to ADM, I'm looking into one specific case, and I've also published an article about this case, which is focusing on one aspect here, but I'm trying to broaden the perspective a little bit. And what I've been looking into is the fully automated decision-making on follow-up applications for social benefits in one municipality in southern Sweden. It's a rather small municipality of 46,000 residents, and they have introduced in 2017 a rule-based algorithms as a decision support system, as they argue. But they are talking about it as a robot colleague that is helping with the processing of records. In consequence, the number of caseworkers has been reduced from 11 to 3 who are working with those applications, social benefit applications. But we have also seen a decline of welfare recipients. And here the municipality argues that's because now the caseworkers can put their attention towards programs, job training programs, so that it's actually a very big success introducing this kind of model. But we could also question in this process and say, maybe since it relies very much on like digital registration, maybe the threshold for certain users or certain citizens in the municipality is rather heightened, and it's becoming more difficult for them to apply for social benefits. So that's also a question. Is it really a success story, or is there something fundamental problematic about it? But in introducing algorithms, we can identify certain forms of cultural techniques in how the caseworkers, but also citizens are relating to the robot colleague. And one cultural technique here is trying to visualize, trying to put representations of the process of automated decision-making, introducing those representations. And this is one. It's from a signature. So when you email with the municipality, you might receive a reply including this signature, which reads, when robots take care of the processing, the municipality takes care of the citizens. So it's again this idea: repetitive tasks are automated, and we finally have time to really focus on human. But it's also, you know, this kind of cloud, immaterial, digital representation of you know, the nice municipality, but working at the forefront of technology with this kind of cloud illustration of the heart, and is still taking care. But in the process of introducing the algorithm in the municipality, also the caseworkers were attending different kinds of workshops where they would be drawing the algorithm to create this kind of visual representation of how the algorithm might look like. And this is to kind of develop a way of relating in a mundane way to a complex technology, and without having maybe the technical logic, technical knowledge of coding or software or whatever. And this is another way of visualizing the decision path that an incoming application would be taking. And it's not very necessary that you can really read it. It's just an illustration of the decision tree. So that's another way of visualizing the algorithm in a way, which I would argue is a cultural technique. But we also have the cultural technique of narratives, creating stories. And this takes its expression in, for example, saying, is this fully automated decision-making, like providing a definition of the process, what is this actually about? But it also includes calling the algorithm a robot colleague, for example. Or in the very beginning of introducing the algorithm, they even had a name. The algorithm was called Ernst. So this is also part of the storytelling, the narrative of the process of automated decision-making, where you can wonder why would they do this? I mean, it's a software program and you have an interface and you kind of tick boxes. So why would you do this? But this is, of course, also to build trust among the caseworkers, that they rely on the software and trust the technology. And here I'm just summarizing what I've just said, naming the algorithms Ernst or Algot in another municipality, but also calling and considering algorithms as robot colleagues that are also integrated in the staff catalog. So they have their own items there. And the third cultural technique that I've been studying a bit more closely, and that is published in this article that I've mentioned before, are cases of litigation. So what could be called the suing of the algorithm, where different public actors are trying to have this discussion about what are the consequences of automated decision-making for different stakeholders in society, but also trying to influence the process of implementing automated decision-making more broadly. And there I've been looking in two cases in the Trelleborg context, where firstly a journalist was requesting access to the source code of the software, and where Trelleborg, the municipality, said no, that that this is a product, this is not public records. And in Sweden, there's a very strong provision of access to public records for the general public, but especially for journalists, as a form of transparency in society. So it's part of a very strong regulation in terms of press freedom. So the journalist went to the Court of Appeal to kind of argue that the algorithm are public records, and as a journalist, he should have access to it. The Kurt decision was that he should gain access, but they didn't rule that algorithms are public records. They ruled or said in their decision that the municipality is owning the software. So there's no commercial entity that is being harmed if the software is being released to the public. So that was the major arguments. They don't have taken the basic decision whether algorithms should be considered as public records or not. So this is still an open question. This is also part of the kind of negotiation process and the kind of cultural technique of relating to technology. How do we govern automated decision-making? So that was very interesting. I mean, and a kind of side story to the whole thing, the journalist gained access. Two other journalists then requested access to the source code. The source code was released to them, including sensitive information on the citizen. But this is a completely other problem, that they didn't probably remove and work through the data or the source code before they released it. The second case is a report to the parliamentary ombudsman by a union for professionals. And here it's important to consider that the union is representing social workers and in that sense caseworkers who have high stakes in the process of automated decision-making. Because firstly, they will work at the interface of those systems, but they are also potentially being automated and they are influenced in their everyday work routines. They might have to adjust to new technological infrastructures, but also their profession might change, the kind of knowledge that they have to have in order to do that job. So this union has really high stakes in this process. And they defined automated decision-making or wanted to have access to the decision tree that I showed earlier, the kind of path that an application takes in the system, and to the interface. How does it look like for the caseworker? But they've never, and this they negotiated together with the municipality actually. So they sat down, had meetings, and were kind of thinking, okay, we take the starting point in the GDPR provision that citizens should have meaningful information about how decisions are taken. And what is then meaningful information in this particular process? So they came up with these two aspects, the decision tree and the interface, but then the municipality never delivered those two artifacts. So then they reported the municipality to the parliamentary ombudsman, and in June 2021, the PO issued a note supporting the union that they should gain access and that this is an important discussion. The PO, the parliamentary ombudsman themselves, they don't have any tools to kind of sanction the municipality, but they can issue those notes in order to support certain public actors. And one other thing that the union is also working towards, or that they are proposing, is to introduce an algorithm ombudsman in Sweden, which is kind of gaining this overview over the use of algorithms in public administration, but also becomes this agency or unit where citizens or other public actors could turn to in order to gain meaningful information and kind of influence the implementation process as well. So that's one of their major proposals that they are working with at the moment. And it's also looking into the actors that are engaging in the litigation cases or these practices of litigation, the journalists on the one hand and the union on the other hand. It's also quite interesting because they are kind of different representatives within the public and representing different groups within society. So it's also interesting how this struggle around technology is taking shape through the practices of different actors. I think I will skip this part because of the time, because I also want to leave some room for questions. I'm just also thinking about different ways of engaging with these questions of cultural techniques. How can we explore these forms of relating to automated decision making, which is a very invisible process, and we talk about black boxing and so on. So how do we actually take a citizen perspective there? So it's one way to look into the civil servants that are working at the interface of those technologies, but how do we take into consideration how citizens relate to these techniques again? So I've been kind of tinkering with or exploring different ways of doing so. And one way is we have been experimenting with completing stories, where we have a starting story, for example, on predictive policing, and then our participants should conclude the story, develop it further. And there we think we could explore the doxa, the kind of underlying ideas about automated decision making that our participants are having. How do they imagine these technologies and the consequences of these technologies and so on. But we also think about doing walkthroughs, the experiences of citizens with different platforms that are used by public agencies, for example, and how they experience the relation to these agencies when a lot of direct contacts are being replaced by remote contact and remote interaction, and also changing caseworkers, that you don't have the same meeting the same person and so on. How is this, what is this doing to the ideas about, you know, the welfare state and so on, the relationship with the state? But we're also interested in developing this method of auditing, where we very specifically talk, for example, about the decision tree and the Trelleborg model, and then have citizens workshop explaining, okay, firstly introducing, okay, the algorithm looks like this, and then from there take discussions about how they relate to this technology. Does it have any implications for them? Do they have any attitudes towards it? But this is also a way to kind of create a discussion about the digital welfare state in the first place with citizens, and create awareness in a way. So I'm going to end here with a kind of, instead of conclusions, so that what I've been trying to discuss throughout these different projects that I've been presenting now is also finding different ways of exploring automated decision making, artificial intelligence, beyond questions of legitimizing the implementation in terms of efficiency and fairness, but exploring the technologies in terms of meaning making and these practices of cultural techniques, how we as humans and citizens are relating to the technology. And then I would be very interested in, you know, the temporality of introducing, are the cultural techniques changing over time, depending on when they've been implemented and how they are being used in the public administration. But I think I will end here, and then we have like 15 minutes for discussion. Pier Giorgio. So I stop sharing.
Sorry for the mic, it was off. And thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And your presentation arose me a couple of questions, let's say. And the main point is thinking about social evolution and technological evolution in parallel as a socio-technical system. So what Saskia Sassen and others define as a socio-technical system, and the fact that most of the technology is still human thought and perceived, maybe for very little time, because we know that algorithm and platform are able to self-programming and self-adjusting. But even though we have, by some extent, you talked about GDPR, lost the battle of the privacy, because we already have given for free an enormous amount of information throughout several, let's say, marketing trick, having access to online games or whatever, you know, whatever something is. I think we have no chance to lose the so-called battle, or we have to keep the position upon the idea that the human-machine interaction has to be more on the end of being a facilitator for human life than being a system maximizing efficiency and profit. And then a very quick question about the tool of research you do use. I love the graph you produce, and just if you want to spend very little word about the technical tool you use for doing the research. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. No, I completely agree with your first comment. And that's also what I'm like, I mean, by looking into these micro processes of meaning making, I'm trying to provide a kind of alternative story to this public, public imaginary of efficiency and fairness that's often connected with these technological systems, that they are better than human decisions, but that we also need to consider other values than these, and especially when it comes to the welfare sector, where it's not only that we are volunteering data, but where we are forced to sharing information, or we are being datafied by the state. So it's not even only the commercial that are kind of trying to trick us into volunteering our data, but with the welfare state that is datafying the citizen, and where we have this kind of coercive data production in a way. That's where I think we need to, and it's not a closed process, it's not finished. I mean, it's still open. So it's still, there are still possibilities to intervene in how these systems are being produced and how they are being implemented. So in that sense, it's very important to be engaged in the discussion. And then in terms of just very specifically for the visualization of the citation networks, we have used the VOS viewer, VOS viewer. It's an open source tool which you can download for free, and then you can import databases from Zotero library and do the visualization both for the keywords that are used, for example, in the articles that you're importing, or the references that are being used in these articles, so that you can see, okay, is there common ground, shared literature, and so on. So it's quite convenient to get the overview over the field, really.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other question? I mean, please feel free to jump in and interact with Kaun.
Yeah, I would have a question. Thanks a lot. It was very interesting, and I have like one technical curiosity and the other actual question. The curiosity would be, did you when you mentioned the survey in Germany, Estonia, and Sweden, was it face-to-face, by phone, or how did you do it?
No, it was so we used a company that's have a representation in all 3 countries, and they work with online panels. Online, so okay. You would fill in
okay, yeah. And the question is, so in your opinion and based on your experience, what would be the best approach, the best model to use these systems, provided that on the
$1 million question? No, but I think what is still largely missing, and that's why I'm interested in the citizen perspective, is the citizens. So to see what they value in the interaction with the state agencies and the municipalities and so on, and that there are certain aspects where they are really positive towards automation and technology. I mean, it's also it's much quicker, certain decisions that are merely administrative, to see, okay, for example, it's completely automated when my child is sick and I report it to the insurance. It's like within less than a minute, I have the confirmation that I will get the sick leave paid. So there, I mean, nobody would say, but I want to have a person who is like putting a stamp on the form. So it's also these advantages. But on the other hand, the people we've been interviewing who are interacting with the employment services, they really value direct contact with one person, with one caseworker, and it's the same person, because then they feel, especially if you're unemployed for a longer period of time, they know me, they know my problems, they know what I would need, what kind of training I would need, what kind of jobs actually make sense for me. And this is something you can't automate, really. And I mean, there are these kind of, and there is not one model, but I think sometimes the pressure from the government and so on, this kind of, which is expressed in these strategy documents, we need to be best, we need to be the most digitized and so on, is putting, you know, pressure on the public agencies and the municipalities to introduce tools that maybe not make so much sense, and create even more work for the caseworkers, but they look good on paper because it's digital and it uses algorithms, you know, that there's a kind of gap in between the visions and the actual groundwork a lot of times, and where maybe a more critical discussion is needed, and where also, you know, sometimes it's better to take it a bit slower, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
And I mean, one shouldn't forget that there's still, I mean, there are 10 million people in Sweden, like approximately the inhabitants, residents, and more than 1 million of them never use any digital online infrastructures. So they are kind of completely excluded from the digital welfare state. So what about those people? And it's not only elderly people that will disappear, it's also other vulnerable groups in society. So, yeah.
Hi, if I could go next. Like while you were presenting, one article came to my mind, written by Alia Guseva, where she compares the credit markets of Russia and America. So in America, the political institutions are strong and the credit institutions are so built well. So the people of America trust these institutions, and whereas in Russia, the institutions are really weak and there is corruption, and people not trust on this credit score, but trust on people, their socialization and their social ties. So I just was I was just thinking when you measured, when you mentioned the trust on automation, what can be the relation between the the trust and strength of the political institutions in a country and people's notion about this automation? So if a particular party or a particular party following a certain ideology is coming with these developmental notions of automation, what will be the people's response? How will it differ from country to country and the particular political party, if I say so? Just sharing my thoughts.
No, it's very, very interesting, and I mean that's still something that we are trying to theorize, like explaining the differences also on an ideological level. And I mean, just historically, for example, in Germany, there's a larger skepticism normally towards like data collection and surveillance and so on among the public, but also politicians. So it's this kind of ambivalence. On the one hand, they feel behind and need to quickly digitize the public sector, but at the same time, there is this reluctance and this kind of skepticism as well. So we are also trying to make this historical connections. And in terms of the ideological part, I don't think, I mean, that's an interesting question to look into, you know, the party programs, for example, and if there are any differences in terms of, you know, the approach towards digitization. I know, for example, for the German context, the Social Democratic Party was before the elections that just happened, or not just, but a while ago, the last ones, they were thinking about going to the campaign with suggesting ministry for digitalization, like which is only dedicated to trying to speed up the process, but then they didn't put it into the program because they think it's a kind of it should be strived for across the ministries. So it should be implemented by all, and this kind of would remove it and kind of segregate it from the. So that was a very specific approach by the Social Democrats. But in general, I think all the parties, even like it's across the spectrum, are having this, you know, we need more digitization. And we need to be quicker. So in that sense, but I haven't studied it, but it's a super interesting question to kind of look into the party programs and their approaches, and if we can make any connections to their ideological stance. Definitely. It would be a nice project for a PhD.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Pier Giorgio, you're mute.
Mic, yes.
Sorry. First of all, I would like to thank you, Shilan, who is joining us. I see him on the group in Zoom. I see also Kalpesh as an hand raised. Then we have to wrap up things, and lately we have to close the room for a couple of minutes, and then we will reopen it. By the way, Kalpesh, sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah. So my question is, like, it is similar to what Abhiram was asking. For instance, when we are talking about efficiency and we are projecting algorithms as nice or in the interest of people, but then when we are thinking from the standpoint of people, there are algorithms, right? But then when we are thinking about algorithms, how important it becomes important for people to have human face. Because when I am thinking about my own field in India, I'm working on credit scoring and the financial practices, where there are credit scoring reports with the microfinance staff, right? Like the intermediaries when they go to the field. But along with the credit scoring report, people see that, okay, they are getting loans from these people. They are being judged by these people, not the credit scoring agency, right? So how that becomes important when we are thinking about algorithms, like human face and algorithms.
I mean, that's also super interesting question. I haven't looked into it specifically, especially like with the human face, if it would make a difference that when you interact with a public agency, a national agency, or the municipality, if you kind of have a visual representation of the caseworker that is actually responsible for you, that would be could be a way, you know, to increase the trust or whatever. And it's, I just wanted to react to the first part of your comment with the bureaucrat being the algorithm, and that's what civil servants have told us as well. Like, I mean, they said we are supposed to be robots, and we are supposed to be stupid. We are not supposed to make differences between people. We just have to follow instructions. And then we are so the algorithm is probably the better bureaucrat in a way. And that's also, but in our project, it's also an argument that it's not only about bureaucracy, but civil servants, especially in Sweden, are always considered as some kind of mediators between the state and the citizens. So it's not only, you know, processing information and making decisions, but it's also creating a relationship. And so maybe this kind of idea with putting a face or a representation of the decision maker into the system would be an interesting approach. And I mean, it sounds interesting and worth to explore.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much indeed, Anne. We have found your contribution very thought-provoking, and we really wish to have you again with us in the future, hopefully in presence, of course, and we will be glad to host you in Bologna University or eventually at IITK Kanpur. And just be in touch. We will contact you for sure by email for further information about our activity and activity of the Unibo IITK Digital Sociology Research Group. Thank you very much. See you in a couple of minutes.
Bye.
Thank
you very much.
you, and enjoy the rest of the spring school. Bye bye.
Thank you, Anne.
Bye-bye.